Hi, and welcome to episode 96 of the Heartland Knits podcast. My name is Vicki, but you can find me as Heartland Knits on Instagram and Ravelry. And today is Sunday, February 22nd, 2015. I want to just take a couple seconds here up at the beginning to thank everybody for watching the podcast. I always want to do this at the end, and then it just I forget about it. So I thought I'll just take a second at the beginning. There are so many podcasts out there. I just want to thank you for watching mine, and I hope you enjoy what I have to show you today. So what is on my needles? Kind of the same thing that was on my needles last week, but just a little bit farther along. So I'm keeping this in my little birds bag from Girl Cave Bags. And I have just been loving this project. And this is my twined mitten that I showed you I started last week. The twined knitting or two-end knitting. And I am knitting a pair of mittens. So last week I showed you I had just kind of cast on and done maybe 3/4 of an inch of the cuff. Well, I have a little bit farther to go. Done on this one. So I restarted this pair because the first ones I cast on, the gauge was a little bit bigger than it said it needed, and so I cast on a smaller needle, and it's coming up to be the right size. So I don't know that it's going to show, maybe a little bit, but you can see this really pretty kind of white on white patterning. I am loving this so much. So the yarn that I'm using is fingering weight wool and silk from Blackberry Ridge Woolen Mill. It's 75% wool, 25% silk, and it's a woolen spun yarn, so it's nice and soft. It doesn't specify kind of what kind of wool. I did go down there a couple times. I've taken their tour when they've had their open house, and I know that they said, like one time they had a great big bale of fleeces that they got. I want to say it was from South Dakota, but I could be wrong. And but I can't remember what breed of sheep they said that they usually use in their wools. But it is a very kind of I want to say it's like Targhee or Rambouillet or so, like one of those kind of squishy kind of breeds. It's very matte looking, even with 25% silk. It's not shiny at all, but I'm loving it knit up in these gloves. It's nice and soft. It's probably not like merino soft, but it is like very, very, very soft. And so this is that technique that I talked about last week, the twined knitting, where you use two ends from the same ball of yarn. So I have one like center pull ball, and I'm using one strand from the inside and one strand from the outside. And you don't actually strand it around, you actually twist the strands. And it's not going to show, but there are horizontal lines on the inside showing all those yarns that are twisting. And then how you do this pattern work is you have one strand on the inside and one strand on the outside. The pattern work it's different in sort of when you do a stitch pattern that is sort of knitted purl. It's more like a brocade. It's just, I really, really, really love it. And then this right here is sort of a Latvian braid where you do, you're purling, but both strands are on the outside. So I'm loving this project completely. On this version, I did do the really traditional red edge. I just couldn't stop myself because the first version that I did, I cast on with a green. And so then these are my ends. And these gloves, so I have gone just past where the thumb is, and I am doing sort of a cross between, I'm using kind of, this book is like how I've been learning how to do it, and it's the Two End Knitting by Anna May Ling. And it has, this book has so much information. It has like tons of, line drawings, of like how to do things. And then there are, tons of charts to use, and it's a really good resource. If you are interested in twine knitting, I would highly recommend this book. There is a new book that has just been published on twine knitting, but I think it is more kind of project oriented. This has kind of basic, like for like mittens, it's got kind of like just basic instructions, and then you can kind of add to it what you want, and then they have like kind of basic charts of how to put them together. It offers a few different ways to deal with the thumb. So I'm going between this book, and then there was a mitten pattern, an article in Threads magazine. I have way back, kind of 80s and 90s, Threads magazine used to have knitting patterns and articles, and they have put those together into compilation volumes. They did that kind of way back too, but I have one of those that has an article on twine knitting that I really loved their projects in that book, in the Threads, because they sort of didn't dump down the projects, try to make them like easier, and the way they're, like doing this kind of, and I mean kind of dumbing it down to like bump up the gauge, or kind of take out little details and things that kind of make the pattern easier to write up and stuff. They just kind of really went out, and so anyway, I'm using the thumb gusset from that article because it's different than any thumb gusset I've ever done, and I love knitting mittens. I think I said that before. So this was different than any that I've ever done before. I'm working this on 2 circulars, but for this, so this is the back of the hand. These are going to be specific right and left-handed. So for this thumb gusset, you increased on the side here, just on one side. So just along this edge, or between these 2 needles, increased for the thumb gusset. And then when you got to where you're going to put these stitches on hold, you took all those stitches in the gusset that you had increased, plus you took more from the palm side of the mitten. And I don't think I've ever done a thumb like that. So you took all that you increased plus extra, and then you cast on a bunch, but it was not the same number that you took from the palm, so that, but it's like the perfect fit. It just like scoops out like perfectly for your thumb. And then also, I have just done this on this last round that I did, and I'll do it again in a few rows. You actually decrease kind of right on this kind of point. You decrease a couple of times just to refine that shaping even a little bit more. So that's what I mean that it's just like tiny little details that don't necessarily have to be there, but they help in the fit. So I really, really loved doing that and seeing all that come together and how that worked. But I'm tempted to make these into gloves. I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to do, because I want to do the traditional thing of having the mittens. But I love how they feel. The yarn is really nice. And I imagine that they do this sort of a thumb gusset because the knitted fabric is not as elastic as regular knitted fabric. It has a little bit of give, but it's not going to stretch as much as regular stockinette stitch does. So this was kind of my main knitting for the week. I know it doesn't look like much, but the gauge on this is 10 stitches to the inch. I'm working those on size 0 needles, which are 2 millimeter, and the row gauge is something like 12 stitches to the inch. So it's small gauge. It is definitely not as small a gauge as some of the originals that were done way back through the reading of some of the mittens and gloves that were made were knit as tightly as 23 stitches to the inch. 23 stitches to the inch. I'm not even that crazy. But I'm sure they must have been using, like cobweb almost weight, wool. But it's such a fun project to do. So I thought I would tell you a little bit more about sort of the history, things that I've been reading about the twine knitting. And I've been thinking, there are so many different kind of types of knitters, reasons to knit, whether it's just to keep your hands busy or to knit a sweater of a style that you want to make up, or of a style that you see in a store and think I can knit that, or whatever. I really think of myself as somebody as like a traditional knitter. I love to do kind of the very traditional styles, whether it's lace work from, Orenburg lace from Russia, or Shetland lace from the Shetland Islands, or, Faroese shawls and things like that. I love kind of understanding kind of their culture, and it's just kind of a connection to sort of knitters of the past, and maybe it's because I didn't have a great story of learning to knit that my grandmother taught me and all of that. Even though my grandmother knit, I didn't really know her, so I didn't. I'm sure she didn't knit by the time I was very little when she died, so and her eyes were very, very bad. But so the twine knitting goes back actually to the mid-16th century. They have found a mitten in a certain area in Sweden that they have dated back to then. So they know it goes back at least that far. And it's interesting. It's a technique that almost was lost. It was almost just completely lost, because in the 1860s, they started teaching knitting in school in Sweden. And a report had come out by somebody or other kind of around that time saying that continental knitting was the fastest and most efficient way to knit. So when they started teaching knitting in school, they started teaching continental knitting. This twine knitting, you have to throw your yarn when you do it. There's no other way, because you have to pick up one strand and take it up over the top, and then the next time you have to take this strand and take that over the top. So you have to keep on twisting that. So you're basically, the video that I watched, the lady was throwing with her right hand, kind of in the way I think of like American throwing, where you're like taking your hand off of the needle. You're not just flicking it kind of as like some, what I think of as sort of like English knitting. So because they were teaching continental, which is, done with the yarn in your left hand, you pick the yarn. People kind of, and you can almost sort of like imagine how it was, like grandma did that kind of old-fashioned way of doing something, and the kids that were learning learned this new way, and kind of grandma's way was sort of looked down on maybe and forgotten, and so it was sort of, people just didn't do it anymore. So except in like one area, I forget the actual name of it, in central Sweden, it's sort of hung on, and that's where when people want to go and study it, it has come about because kind of one little area kind of stuck it out, and maybe it was passed down from mother to child or grandmother to child or whatever. So I love this with that aspect, and it also makes me think of, I knit with the yarn in my left hand. I knit with untensioned continental, I think it's called. So basically that means you throw with your left hand. So I am doing this with my left hand, but I pick up the yarn separately. I don't like leave it wrapped. I don't pick at the yarn when I knit. And this is like all the time when I knit. I can knit kind of every way because I used to teach knitting, and I think everybody knits different. What feels comfortable is different for everybody, and so I taught myself to be proficient both ways, or as many ways as I could find, because then you could show them one way, try it like this and see, does this feel better? And, holding the needle like a pencil, or holding it under your arm, or the one that I don't really, I basically know how to do it, but I don't really practice it, is the Portuguese, where it comes around your neck. But my basic style that I kind of always go back to is this untensioned continental. And I think it's done me well because I have knit a lot for a lot of years, and my wrists are holding up. I'm probably more careful with them now because chemo. I learned one of the lasting side effects I had when I had chemo 3 years ago was that I could tell that I lost wrist strength. So when I tried to open something, it was really hard for me to do it. And if I carry something, I can feel it in my wrist. And I actually just read that chemo, or at least the kind that I was on, frays your tendons, and your wrists are especially susceptible. So I am like more careful now of resting my hands periodically when I'm knitting. But when I knit the way I do, my wrists are very quiet. There's not a lot of like twisting, like a lot of movement in them. So I think that is what has helped. So, but through the years, I was laughed at by people. I was like sneered at and like looked down their nose at, and like, that's how you knit? It works for me. So I think that this is just a testament, like you need to like follow your instincts and knit the way you like to knit. Because in the long run, you have to enjoy what you're doing. And I don't know how I got off on that tangent, or where I was where I was going, but so anyway, this was my main knitting project that I loved. I have been working on and really have been enjoying. I did do a couple more rows on the bohus, or rounds on the bohus, when I did the V-can for the ZK V-can, and it still looks the same. But the other thing that I picked up is I received the email notification that I got into knitting camp. So I was thinking I was going to get in. I was hoping I was going to get in, but you never know till you get that actual email that says you are. So I was really excited, and it's going to be a great camp because there's a few people who haven't been there in a few years, so they're coming back, so it'll be really fun. But I picked up my coat because first thing I thought was I better get in because I knit that coat. So I was like, yeah, I have my coat done, but I've worn it a few times and there were a few things I wanted to change on it. So I thought I'm going to get those done right away. So I thought I would show you if I can. So on the back, I don't know if it's going to show, sort of. You can see I put this little sort of, on the back of like a pea coat or something, they'll have like a little kind of a half belt just for kind of decoration. So I put that on my coat. I found smaller size buttons, just like the antique ones, just like I put on the front, the black faceted glass, and sewed those on. So I just did it, and it has the little, it's not going to show, I don't think, the little reverse phony seam along the edges of it. So I did that just for a little, I had to make it a little bit different than everybody else's. And then I also, because, when I was working on this, I got down to the end, I just wanted it to be done. So I knew I didn't like these a real lot when I first did them. But then as I wore them, they stretched out even more. And that's the little, I don't know if you can see, these little loop closures. They're attached on here with a few rows of garter stitch, and then you do this I-cord and graft it on. So originally I did it the same size as the needle size that I used for the rest of the knitting, and they just they looked fine when it was buttoned, but when it wasn't unbuttoned, they just seemed a little like floppy or something. And the I-cord had stretched a little. I can't remember if I did the I-cord before I actually had the buttons or if it was after. But anyway, I was never happy with how they looked. So I took all of those off and put them on again using, doing this the same way as it says in the pattern, but just using a smaller size needle than what I used for the coat. And it made them a little firmer. And then I did less rounds of the I-cord so that and the I-cord itself is firmer knit, so I don't think it's going to stretch as much as it did before. So I'm calling it like redone, like the coat was reknit like again. So I'm so happy that is done, that I don't have to like work on that. So that is really all that I have. It wasn't a big like knitting kind of week. I did a little bit on my stripy sock too, because I went and I got my hair cut, and so I had that with me, but it doesn't really look that much different. I'm growing my hair out long, so this is like the first step in getting it longer. We'll see. But yeah, it's a pretty quick show. But that's good because I know you're all busy, and I know I don't have time. When podcasts are over an hour, it's like I just delete them out because like I can't spend over an hour. I don't know. That's just too long. But anyway, I thank you all for watching. You can find the podcast on iTunes. You can find it on YouTube. You can follow me there. It is Heartland Knits is the channel. Heartland Knits, 2 words. And we do have a Ravelry group, which is Friends of Heartland Knits. And you can come on over there and join if you choose. But I hope you all have a really great week, the last week of February. And until I see you again, from my heart to yours, happy knitting.